to D10tion, where a bunch of us pretend that we know what we're talking about D&D. I'm your host, Tristan, Smash Now, Smash Later. We got Brandon, ask your questions later, and then we have Sam, stab first, stab later. Today we're going to talk about why D&D, and that's an odd question already, so what we're going to talk about is give a brief history of D&D and why we D&D in general. So, who knows anything about D&D?
I mean, I roughly know that D&D started back in the late 60s with the very famous, the infamous Gary Gygax, who made some of the most immensely hard dungeons that everyone strives to make, everyone strives to fight. We still talk about Gary Gygax and what he made and everything he did. So, I mean, that's a good starting point.
Yeah. So, I think it was 1967. It was Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson who first kind of came up with the idea of D&D. It was later presented at this International Tabletop Federation, something like that. INF.
Sounds nerdy. Probably is real.
Probably nerdy. And so that's kind of when the whole thing kicked off. And then roughly in the mid 70s, the first edition of D&D was published.
I've been playing D&D for a very long time, since I was probably like 8. First edition, when I was able to get my hands on it, it is very weird, very hard to understand if you didn't grow up with it and you don't have the books. We're not even going to get into some of the nitty-gritty details. Pretty much the first real starter for everyone, I think, was like 3.5, but that didn't happen for years later.
Yeah. And so the thing with D&D is that every once in a while they come out with a new edition. Currently we're on the 5th edition. The first edition was, over 40 years ago at this point. They keep changing things up every once in a while and adding new classes and changing up the rules, sometimes kind of drastically.
Very.
So depending on when you learn to start playing, kind of changes your perspective a little bit on the game.
Right. I mean, this is to the point where sometimes you have players who haven't adjusted to a full new edition yet, that they're still working off another edition and can cause slight things to happen. Like if you're used to playing 3.5 or even 4, going to 5, it can cause a few discrepancies.
There's a whole difference between 3.5 and 4, let alone 4 to 5, because 3.5 and 5 are the closest to each other so far. 4, I don't know if you ever talked about this, 4 had a crap ton of classes, a crap ton of races, but there were spells and things, yes, but there were powers. You had your utility powers, which was a once per long rest, your daily, which is once per day, your encounter, and your I can't remember the technical name for it. It's like cantrips. You can use them whenever you want. Mm-hmm. And the powers they were sometimes spells, but they were like legitimate like abilities. Like they were special attacks you'd use. I know the one I most know is Thunder's Ram attack, where you just hit somebody and it just does like you hit them and then like lightning damage. But I could do that once per encounter and that was it. While in D&D 5th edition, if you have an ability like raging or something, you get that rage damage every time you hit. It doesn't matter. And so that's anyone who's going from like 4 to 5 I can only imagine it's been weird
like
for
them.
Yeah,
mind mess. Yeah.
Right. I mean, and especially because with like geek or nerd culture as a whole is getting much more of a popular standpoint. The thing that you want to do is to try and get something like this popularized, is to make it as simplified to get new players into it. And I mean, with fifth edition, I mean it's like you said, it's drastically different. But then with the additions of things like D&D Beyond, getting a new player in versus like handing someone a textbook and a sheet of paper, going, all right, we're gonna play this, and you're gonna be like, oh, what?
There's something so nice though. I know. I don't think you guys played before, and you were a DM. Yeah. Did you guys actually like have the books and roll up characters like that?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, there's
something a little fun about that, and it's nostalgic for players who have been playing a long time. But I mean, D&D Beyond, just like if you ever are put off by that kind of like having to sit down and figure out and do math, especially like that alone just makes the experience that much better, I think, for certain types of people.
Well, it's like streamlining it. Well, because it's one of those things when you're trying to develop a character with the book versus D&D Beyond. I mean, if you were to tell me to go make a character using the book, it could take an hour and a half before I can even get past race or class. Versus D&D Beyond, they like, hey, here's the list of races, and if you click one, it goes, this is kind of a brief overview. Do you like that, or do you want to learn more about it? And you go straight to the details page, and same thing with classes. And again, it's like a step-by-step process that takes you through to it. Versus like, all right, turn to page 375. And you're like, no.
Yeah, D&D Beyond's like a little like helper fairy. That's like, I mean, I'm not gonna be super nerdy with it, but it's kind of like Navi. Like, hey, listen, like, boop, there's a little information, you can move on.
Right.
And so, if you've never looked at D&D Beyond, all you need is it's free to use. You can use the basic rules, and all you need is a Twitch account. You're good to go.
Yeah, and I mean, especially I think for Dungeon Masters too, because I think it makes everything a lot easier. Like, I want to say it's like $25 a year just to get like the base package on it, but you can get access to like different. You can get the DM's guide. You can buy just straight up things like online compendiums, and everything's right there for you. You don't have to sit there and like flip through 1,000 pages to figure out monster stats. You literally would just type in like Beholder, and it would just pull it up right there for you, and it just makes everything so much easier, and really sort of takes off some of the load from a dungeon master.
I mean, yeah, and especially when it comes to that being able to be such a streamlined, quick thing, that works wonders for one shots. Because most times you don't want to introduce a new player to a full campaign, because that can be really overwhelming, especially if you're like demanding more of their time. Like, hey, we're doing this weekly, versus like, hey, come out for this day and then this day for a short story, and you can build a character. So, like, even if you have no idea about what you want your character to do, or like your background or anything, you can quite easily just make a character like, it's a dwarf barbarian who
you can hit randomize and let D&D Beyond just do it.
Right.
And I think
kind of cool.
Things like that are why D&D probably at this point has like way over 20 million people. And there's D&D Adventurers League, so you can go if you really want to a local game shop that has Adventurers League. It's free. It's fun. It's a good way to meet people and potentially meet new friends and make your own group out of these groups, because there's no commitment. There's different. You show up, they give you what you need, you go to a table, you play. And if you continually show up, you'll level up and go through different adventures with these people. But it's a good way to get started. And I mean, they didn't really exist when I started. It was your home crew or nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think that part of it has, come up more, especially as Dungeons and Dragons has kind of gone through this like flux of like, booming popularity in the 80s, and then it sort of like went under the surface in the 90s because the 90s were doing their, but especially it's coming back up a lot now, especially in a lot of like mainstream media. You have Stranger Things kind of introducing
the Demogorgon,
and then you have things like Critical Role, being much more of a
last beat of Matthew.
Yeah. Praise the Lord and Savior, Matthew Mercer. But it's kind of just gained that momentum again. So I think that certainly helps.
Well, and of course that kind of leads into everyone's impressions of D&D, because we talked about how nerd culture is always on a constant rise now, where you can go to a theater and no one's making fun of you for seeing a superhero movie. D&D has seen this huge spike in it being a totally acceptable thing. Because especially in the media, all you have is that where people imagine, like, oh, what do people do when they play D&D? Is a bunch of cloaked, hooded kids in their mom's basement.
I can't be magic missile. Yeah, like that.
Yeah, essentially, that's what everyone's like pre-recognition of what it is. And granted, to some degree, it can be depending on the group that you play with.
I definitely have done that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's one of those things where it's opening up people's minds to what it can be and becoming again. You have tons. I mean, not only do you have people like Critical Role, where it's people they recognize the voice actors, because voice actors are always on a constant rise too. Where you can recognize these people and go, oh, they're playing D&D. But then you have
people like Vin Diesel, Terry
Crews,
Joe Magna. I can never pronounce his last name.
The guy from Magic Mike and Deathstroke and all that stuff. Yeah,
Joe, who plays Archon, a Oathbreaker Paladin, I do believe, who is a follower of Tiamat. He's a Red Dragonborn, and he is. I think he's at this point. He's got to be at level 20. He's got to be a high tier. Broken character. He's in reference to other games you can play, mobile games, and he's in them. So it's become pervasive where if you play D&D and you know of these things, you can catch people making homages to these more up and coming popular things. Pillars of Eternity. That's what I was thinking. Pillars of Eternity, you can download and interact with the voice pack and the characters from Critical Role's first campaign. They have Vox Machina good to go, which you can play. Like, you can have their voice and like interact with them. So that's just, I mean, a video game bringing in a live stream D&D campaign.
Which is really cool. I mean,
Right.
because like you said, you know, a lot of people, I think, their first impressions, like I know my first impression of D&D was very, like, and I've always been kind of a nerd, but I think that was always, like, there's like a nerd line, and once you cross that line,
too nerdy.
Yes, but, you know, that was, you know, so it's, so not, like I play D&D, so it's not like if you do play D&D, you're, like, a huge dork. But that was always, that was always my impression, though, was, like, you know, I'm willing to be, like, comic book nerdy and, like, book nerdy, but, like, the D&D line, I don't know about that.
And well, part of it is because, again, what your impressions of it is through the media and stuff like that. So, because even, like, until you actually play, you don't know what it is. You're just told this is what it is in your mind. And that's the biggest problem. I mean, the first thing that I can remember that used the terms Dungeons and Dragons was the Dungeons and Dragons movie, which
is horrible.
That's a discussion for another day.
It's great. It's awesome. I love it. It's my favorite movie. I am not being told to say this by outside powers. But, I mean, there's also the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon show.
Right, there's that one.
Which had actual classes until they got to, what was it? There was Warrior, Ranger, Wizard, Barbarian, Acrobat. Like, no one's that's not a thing.
That's their rogue.
I wish there was an Acrobat class. That'd be great. It'd be useless in battle. But it'd be great outside.
Well, you don't want just somebody who's just like dodge.
Shoot a bow and arrow with my feet.
This isn't Dark Souls. You can't just dodge roll around the battlefield and expect to win.
You can certainly praise the sun.
I mean, you can always do that. You can do that no matter what, wherever you are.
Right. So it's definitely one of those things where our first impressions aren't always going to be the best. Yeah. And again, the evolution that goes through everything it changes so much. Like, so for example, my dad played the first edition for stuff, which of course is like day and night from what we do now. So it's, I mean, like, just as the difference of like AC, because there was the old cards that we had showed you that you knew about.
Yeah, I knew. I'd never seen them though. Yeah, had them all.
Right. So like with D&D being part of that was something that he just did. Whether he was in the military or not, which is first off that big thing. Everyone goes like, oh, it's a bunch of nerdy guys in a mom's basement playing D&D, but where you have a bunch of military people who have nothing else to do.
Just chilling on a submarine playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Chilling on a submarine playing D&D because they're like, well, we're around, we're nothing else to do.
We can't go anywhere.
I mean, and apparently it's one of those things where it's so influential with so many people where, like, first off, if you were to even, like, meet my dad, you wouldn't immediately go, you're a nerd, until you walk in the house and you see it's plastered with Doctor Who stuff.
You're a nerd!
I mean, and again, it's such an influence where my name, Tristan, is what he had as his first edition wizard. He had a wizard named Tristan.
And what do you play now?
I play a barbarian.
Which is
the opposite.
Really, kind of close. I don't know.
So, I mean, it's one of those things where people who play it do definitely keep it it's a big, important part of them to at least during the time while they're playing it. Or it has a lasting effect at least.
Yeah.
Like, as far as my first experience of playing was with Sam and a couple of other people. Well, it was one of those things where
I haven't heard any of this.
Okay. Well, first off, let's set the precedent of like D&D has been something that we've talked. The more it builds up momentum and stuff, and again, I know about it from my dad. I don't know how you heard about
Honestly,
Through the grapevine.
I think it was just one of those things where like we had just started talking about it, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'll give it a shot because I love you and I love you. It's just how it happened. But,
I'll bite the bullet on the
yeah, right.
And I mean, the problem that we ran into was because D&D, much like any other, like whether it's video game groups, I mean, you hear about like the lobbies, and you either have people that are like your best friends or your worst enemies as far as trolling or taking it too seriously.
My first thought when you said that though was a paladin and a rogue.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Rogues and paladins, rogues and clerics, rogues and
everyone
else.
Rogues and everyone else.
I mean, so it's one of those things where when we were initially trying to get into it, we found other people that were into it and that were great and were friends and stuff like that. And then we're like, okay, cool. How do we play? I was like, well, we need to find a dungeon master or a DM or a GM or whatever.
That's always the hardest part.
And of course, it's always the hardest part where you have people that want to play, but no one wants to DM because of the amount of work it is.
Or no one knows how.
Because it does take a certain level of skill. But then we ran into the issue where we found someone, but they were one of the super serious players that took it like you expected him to show up in a cloak with an actual dagger ready to kill you.
Well, but not even that. I think it was just more like as a DM, I think it would have been almost too...
Was he a lone wolf? Was his character a lone wolf?
No, as a DM.
Oh, he was a DM.
He was a DM.
Yeah. Oh, was he...
So I think as a DM, he would have been too...
Was he heavy RP or heavy battle?
He came out the gate with... without even... He met us once, didn't even bring up D&D. We were just like, yeah, we're going to meet this guy and have dinner with him and see how we get along, just so we at least have a face to the name. Mm-hmm. And then the next interaction we had was table rules. And it wasn't even table rules as much as how we are going to do this.
How the commandments will be set forth.
Yeah, I think it just would have been too strict for our group, especially because we were so new to it. Like, I could have understood it if we were like, if we had been like, you know, players on a regular basis who had been doing it for years.
Right, but we had 4 people that had never touched it before and 1 player that had dabbled. And it was one of those things where if you're going to come in that strong about it, then you're going to... It was to the point where we were like, nah, we're good, fam.
Yeah.
So and then...
We're going to roll on out of here.
Yeah, so then Sam took it upon herself to try and figure it out, and we attempted to do a dungeon. So Sam played the DM. I played a barbarian dwarf.
Big, weird. Is this a pre-con dungeon?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's not one that I made. It was one that I had downloaded.
Gotcha.
It was one of those things where we, with such little experience, it was like, what were you going to try and make everything?
Yeah, I figured I would start with something that was already there,
so we could at least get a feel for it. So I mean, I played a barbarian dwarf. I mean, we don't even know about levels.
I think we just started.
We had 2
level 1. We had a half elf rogue, and then we had I don't even remember what Jesse was. Jesse wasn't a cleric, I don't think. I don't remember what
I think
the player was.
Sean was
a bard.
Was he a bard?
He was a bard.
I thought he was a
So
sorcerer.
You had a barbarian, a rogue, a bard.
And this was 3.5. So this was 3.5.
I'm gonna assume a healer.
See, that's why I don't remember if he was a cleric.
I wanted to say he was a cleric, but I mean, all we did was one dungeon. Yeah. We fought like 3 different things. All I did was run around headbutting doors open. We had no idea what we're doing. So as far as like checking for traps or unlocking doors or even opening doors, we're so out of direction. I was just playing around, being a brainless dwarf.
I'm a dwarf.
Yeah, he would literally be like, "I'm gonna headbutt the door," and I'd be like, "Okay, I guess you rolled a headbutt the door." Like,
yeah, that's exactly what it is. You have to roll to beat the door.
But like, having that be your first like player experience or your first DM experience, it wasn't optimal.
No, like, it was like disheartening to a point, because it's the fact that like even as a DM, you're like that you're like, I have too much to get my grasp on. There was, of course, with us, it was like there's not enough story, or there was so much work put into it for a single dungeon that we didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And I mean that's the challenge of starting out, but for anyone out there who's trying to get started and that's how they do it, give it another shot. Keep trying. You'll pick up things, read the forum, pick up, and just literally, as cliche as they say, roll with it.
Right.
Yeah. Make your D&D is a structure. D&D is a house, but you can deck that house out with as much wacky and crazy stuff as you want, or you can make that house out of brick and make it very rural and make it a 4-wall, have a roof on top, and that's your brick house.
And then you put in a pool.
Yeah, well, see, I think what the biggest thing is you can try and teach yourself as much as you can about, let's say, like interior design and carpentry and stuff like that. But you're gonna need a good contractor or a good interior decorator to guide you. And so, like, it's one of those things where sometimes your DM can be the end all be all. Or you'd make it or break it for you as far as getting into D&D. Because if you have a DM who you're a first-time player and you're trying to learn... Because, like, for example, I remember trying to learn Magic and the Magic the Gathering. Oh. And I'm in the middle of trying to learn, and I'm not a fast learner. I'm well aware of that. That's why I play Barbarians.
It's
the Barbarians.
Ooh.
I'm okay with who I am. I had made a wrong move with the cards, and I got smacked on the hand for it, and it was like, and that right there was the trigger of like, okay, I'm not learning this. I gave up on it. So it was that danger of having a DM that was so overbearing that was like, we'll try this, and then it wasn't like an end all be all for us to try it on our own, and we didn't figure it out.
Yeah.
But it was definitely when you have a DM such as yourself. It made the process. I mean, granted, we had you had D&D Beyond at your disposal.
Luckily,
even if you didn't have D&D Beyond, I think your attitude towards teaching new players or getting people involved, it was very clear that D&D is a passion for you versus someone else who takes it seriously.
Well, and to your credit, you've been doing this a long time.
Right.
I've been doing this so long. I've seen so many editions.
I mean, because you started when you were
like 8. So 3.5 was the thing, and that was I learned from best friend and brother. Best friend was talking about it. We borrowed a book. We got our book. My brother had a friend who was also starting. Everything was happening around that same time, and then back then I was a player. No way, heck, an 8-year-old would think, you walk in the room, there's a dragon, and everyone would be like,
that's exactly what he sounded like, by the way.
Yeah, pretty much.
Could you imagine? Because that right there tells you right there how a child would DM would be like. All right, cool. It's called Dungeons and Dragons.
We're in a dungeon,
and there's a dragon. It's like, oh no,
yeah.
no.
So when I was a player years ago, my characters were all edgelords. Either that or they were all like love everyone. There was no in between. I didn't have anyone with good
Still true.
characters.
Still true.
I have one character I've played so far that's been happy-go-lucky, and he's still an edgelord, just no one's seen it yet. So he's both, which means he's a good character. But I remember one character his name was Ancient. Don't know why. His name was Ancient. He was a half-elf cleric, if I remember properly.
So he even wouldn't have been that old.
No, so he couldn't have been ancient.
He's no dwarf.
And I tried to play that character every time we did a new campaign. I wanted to be ancient. For some reason, his role sucked. He was so bad, but I think he was my first real character that I sat down and made and tried to figure out when I was younger. So I wanted him to do it forever. Eventually, when I grew a brain and understood that it was terrible, I moved on. But Ancient still exists. Not in any game I'll ever play again. Just in my heart.
So that's your first as being very young and being introduced to it. What about as far as your first experience at what point did you start DMing as your or even why did you even decide to DM?
No one decides to DM. The DM is thrust upon you. Are thrust upon the mantle of DM.
I chose to DM.
It was thrust upon you by that one.
It was thrust upon you.
No, it wasn't. I made that choice.
You
keep telling myself that. Delusional.
No one makes the choice to be a DM. If anyone says I chose to be a DM, they're lying. Their players are holding them hostage. They have a blood contract.
No, see, I actually disagree with that because I actually really enjoy doing it.
Yes, but you were, not to discredit, you were very hesitant.
I think I was more hesitant because I had tried in the past, so I think it was more of a personal
Well, there was also the fact
failure.
There's also the hesitancy of following another DM.
Yeah, and I mean especially one that's been doing it for a long time.
Right.
Well,
the problem also is because you have your DM being a player. Yeah. If you were DMing a group of people that let's say you took a bunch of new players that don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
That don't know to even question you. That's a whole different thing versus. You're learning, and where it's a benefit to have someone who knows what they're doing with you, to try and go, okay, you were my DM, now I'm your DM. I hope I can bring it up to the level that you feel is necessary.
Which you did. Well, we'll get into that a different session.
Yeah.
When I first time I started DMing was, I guess, in high school, and then from high school I didn't play in college until probably junior year. I started. I really wanted to play, and I had just started being an RA, and I was like, how can I do my job and make sure my residents aren't out doing terrible, horrible things to their bodies and other people? and play D&D and get paid for it. And lo and behold, I was in the art residence hall, so they're all a bunch of nerds. And so it wasn't hard for me to go, who wants to play D&D? And then bing, 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 bing. Everyone popped up. And so I probably had like 8 players, which was a lot from going from DMing like 5 to not DMing to DMing 8. Oh, it's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah.
And we did 4th edition, because that's when 4th edition was a book, and I had a friend who owned all of the books legally and made PDFs out of them. And gave me those legal PDFs. So I had all the books, and so I could send people what they needed whenever they needed it to make their characters. And it started off junior year, and that campaign took until probably I was out of college, because I stayed in a year, so probably like a year and a half of total time if you don't count the summer break and everything. So probably like a year and a half of like gaming, where we once a week, because it's a lot easier in college because everyone has their schedules. Once a week we sat down and did 3 to 4 hours. Sometimes we did an all day, like 3 to like 8 hour session. I'd love to do that.
So I guess we should also just mention there that people that don't know, or if they're starting to get into D&D is a longer term. It's not. None of it's. I mean, you could probably play it at a minimum an hour, but you probably won't get a whole lot done.
No, if you're gonna do minimum hours, you're trying to do quick one shots or quick little snippets of D&D.
Right, because D&D is the world where you can in 5 hours you can travel in seconds, but in battle. 5 seconds can take 5 hours.
We'll get into more nitty gritty things, but one thing in combat, one round is 6 seconds in game. Out of game, it can take anywhere from, if everyone knows what they're doing, 5 minutes to 15, depending on what's happening, who does what, and what happens. Yeah. So, in D&D, if you're thinking about sitting down in D&D with some friends, take an afternoon, take a time where everyone can sit down, have some mimosas if you really want, and have brunch to sit down, talk, and figure it out, and then play. Have your day and play and hang out with them. Get comfy chairs.
Yeah.
Get
comfy chairs, 100%. And maybe some beers. So.
Yeah, probably that.
I mean,
I was going to say, so I mean, the next thing we would probably kind of talk about would be our first experience as far as playing 5th edition with a DM that we were comfortable with. Yeah. I mean, because, I know Brandon through our day jobs, which, yay. But of course, you and I are married, so you kind of got sucked into it. And the Brand had, with Brand's passion of D&D, it makes it that much more likely for him to bring it up in conversation, and I'm just as likely to be like, oh yeah, and then talk about our first experience, and of course that gets Brandon hooked. So bringing it up to him and us getting sucked in, we were almost prepared for the worst, I think, because we were
because we'd already had some
poor experience.
Bad experience.
Boy, did I let their expectations down.
Yeah, it was awful. No,
but it was really nice to have somebody, and he's going to sit here and say that I'm talking about, but it was really nice to have somebody who not only knew what they were doing, but was really, creatively open with what you can do with D&D. And I wouldn't say that you're a super lax DM, because you're not, but I think that you just kind of allow for a bit more of, the imaginative spectrum.
You want people to enjoy it, which was what you got, because, anyone who knows me more than 5 seconds, they tend to see something like the Thor's hammer that I wear, or the arm ring or something.
Big dude.
So it's one of those things when we're starting to discuss characters. You're right off the bat. You're like, well, there's a new race called Goliaths, which I don't know anything because we didn't play since what?
Since 3.5.
Since 3.5. Yeah. And you're like, well, there's this race called Goliath that you would probably enjoy playing. It's like, oh, that sounds super great. And you're like, well, they've also introduced the Nordic gods into this as well. And you're like, oh, shoot, that's great. And so it was one of those things where you knew, especially when you know someone well enough, you can get them involved. But as well as, like she said, you may not be super lax, but you want us to indulge in the creativity process of it. So if we have ideas or something, you're more than happy to at least listen to them, or even have something happen down the line.
Yeah. My thought about it all is magic exists in D&D. And if magic can exist, almost anything can happen.
Right. I mean, because you're not going to let something broken. Because if you run into people who if you want to be an edgelord, that's going to get nipped in the bud. I mean, because there's like that story we'll watch where someone tried to be an edgelord the first time they play. Like, oh, I come from the sky in a raging comet.
And then they take 300 d6 of falling damage and just obliterate themselves.
And then they get stuck with a normal character. I mean, so you're going to run into those people that want, because they hear D&D and they want to be the most badass protagonist that they can be, versus a character that lives in this world. Which I think is the biggest thing that people need to remember, is that with D&D, you're supposed to be someone living in the world. Versus a character in a video game or an anime or something. You can have certain things where... it's one of those things where you can have certain characters that have certain importance in different areas.
Yeah.
And in it, you're also going to run into times where your characters save the world or save a land or something, because, I mean, D&D things happen, and you need heroes.
The goal is eventually to become heroes. The goal of D&D is not eventually to become a goat farmer.
Unless you're really...
Unless you really want to become a goat farmer.
Nothing wrong.
Nothing wrong with goat farmers.
You be a goat farmer, but the rest of us will go out and slay that dragon.
Right. I mean, so it's one of those things where anything you can do to encourage someone developing a character only helps them. As well, then that means it helps you by everyone having a good time, and you're with the DM that's open to suggestions. I think is much more beneficial, because I can come to you with any kind of thing. Like I can go into like Nordic lore and be like, hey, there's a magical sword called Graham that's hidden somewhere. Do you think maybe if I gave you the information, you might consider putting that in? First off, that's on as a player of me. That's me not demanding it, but going, hey, here's something that you might want to introduce that you haven't even thought of. Or someone goes like, man, it'd be really cool if I had I want my character to have a mask. Is there some reason I can say why I have a mask? Or even if they don't even have a reason, like I want a mask, and your job as a DM is gonna be like, all right, you can have a mask.
You can have a mask.
But we're going to make something happen about that. Every time you put it on, you turn into Jim Carrey. I mean, whatever happened.
God, that'd be horrifying. Because my philosophy on stuff like that is, people are making, especially you guys, are making characters that I want you to want to, play. Mm-hmm. But I also want you to, take... That's one of the good things about D&D is to take off all the stresses of the world and put it aside and jump into one with fantasy and magic and steampunk and, depending on what you're doing, there's an edition called Spelljammer where you can go into space. But you can take that and you can become a different character, become a different person, and do experience and have a mental theater of epic proportions where something cool is happening, and then you can feel better about whatever happened in your day, or as we all do, is it time to play D&D yet? I want to take off that hat of work and put on my wizard hat. I've only played wizard once, so I don't really have one of those.
Well, so I think what it comes down to is, because there's going to be other players that don't want it. They just want a strict rule-based thing. So I think what it really comes down to, as a player, finding a DM that's right for you, or making your expectations clear for when you play.
And if you have a bad experience, definitely, like you said, keep trying. I'm glad that we did. I'm glad that we gave it another chance.
Because it wasn't like we were so turned off from playing it. It was just
their choice.
He sucked us into it. We had to.
It's one of those things where it wasn't even like the time that we played. It wasn't like we didn't have a good time. It wasn't like we were so this is the stupidest thing ever.
Yeah.
It was more like, with our experience, it was much more of like, man, that was difficult. We have no idea what we're doing. Yeah. And it was kind of at the point of like, if we're ever to come back to this, we need to know someone who knows what they're doing and can talk to us. And again, so it's one of those things, we're finding a DM that's right for you. If you want those strict D&D experience, because there's definitely purists. And there are going to be people that come up and want to be purists as well. You see it all the time in any other kind of game where you can have some people who want to strictly play a sport or a video game or anything else like that, where they strictly want to do what they want to do, and you're gonna have people that want to goof around. And that's just to change the way you want to play a game, because there's it's like the example of a difference between someone playing an open world of a different kind of the other. And this is not the best example, but if you're playing Grand Theft Auto versus Saints Row, one has a bit more of a serious tone than the other, and it's essentially the same game. So you can be like, no, I want to be this crime lord doing this, or you want to be like, I want to run around with a dildo baseball bat hitting aliens into space.
Two things you can almost do in D&D.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can make it happen.
I mean, and that's also a big thing. Is and this goes back to D&D Beyond, is making it so much easier. Is the homebrew stuff. With homebrew, it used to be, as far as I could tell, like you would just run around and like you would either, if you tried to make it yourself, it was just you, or if
you had to like write down all your stats, write down what it was.
Yeah.
Right, it was a challenge to make something real, or you would scour the internet and hope that someone had made something similar enough that you were happy with. Whereas with D&D Beyond, you just go to the homebrew section. It's again like a step-by-step process, or you have people who have shared their works, or so you can either base it off something someone else has done or something similar. Yeah. I mean, to the point where same thing with like races. There might be like, man, it'd be funny if I could play D&D like this race from a sci-fi I watch, but make it appropriate for D&D. And of course, talking to your DM is always going to be the first and foremost thing that you want to do.
You can't just roll up to a table and be like, I am a 10,000-year-old book monster. Like,
right.
That ain't gonna fly.
Versus like if I've made a race and I've talked to you, it was like, hey, I've converted Vulcans from Star Trek into a race like as like an offshoot of elves with a little bit more telepathic ability. Like,
that'd be a totally fine variant.
Or even let's say that I'm a brand new player who's played a little bit and who wants to change it up. I could come to a DM that, again, if you choose the right DM, and be like, hey, I'd love to try and make this into something. And you can work together with the DM to do something,
you should work with your DM on anything you do.
Yeah. I mean, because a good DM should be, in my opinion, should be something that you can talk to about the game no matter what it is, whether it's questions or if you want something to happen or want to create something. I mean, because even outside of it, outside of your play session, at least in our experience with you, it's been one of those things where if we want to do something story-based outside of when we're playing, because there's been times where we ended a session in a spot, and then I go home, and I'm like, man, it'd be really cool if my character did this. And I'm not going to be like, okay, by the way, Brandon, my character runs around the room now and does a whole bunch of stuff. No, versus what I had done was like, oh, my character goes to the corner and prays, and this is the prayer he says, and I send it to the DM. So that way it's not vital to other players to hear, but the DM knows what my character is doing. You can adjust from there, or nothing can happen because, it's a world.
Your deity may be like, I'm busy, I'm at the lunch.
Yeah.
So, like, we'll probably have a whole episode about homebrew alone.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
the key thing, I think, the point of it is a DM that works for you. If you want a strict story, there are strict DMs, or if you want more of a fun, random thing, or more creative based, finding the right DM for that is also going to be key. It's just depending on how you are as a player.
Yeah. So, I mean, what, like, as far as going forward, like, were there anything that you're hopeful to, like, have come out in D&D? Like, what do you, like, if they were to come out with a new edition, what would you want?
God, before we get to the new edition, I know there's one thing I'm really excited for about D&D Beyond, and that's the encounter builder, because building encounters as DM with having to manage a different, like, a book and paper versus your characters who are on D&D Beyond and trying to make sure it's leveled properly is super hard when you don't have all of the books in front of you. You have D&D Beyond with the books, but it's still going through and doing it and flipping through and going back to your character sheet, going back to this. You need like multiple screens open. So the encounter builder is something that I am great. So hyped for, because you guys are going to be able to fight. I mean, you guys already fight. This is where I'm kind of proud. You already fight some pretty cool battles in my mind, interesting fights. But now they're going to be able to step up, because then I can add more homebrew creatures to it,
right?
And like add things. I'm really hoping they add a layer action and legendary actions as a thing I can add.
Yeah.
I know I can add it to.
So like, if in layer, click here. Like
then you can you can do that, because there's some things, if a dragon's out of its lair, it doesn't get a layer action. But if you walk into a white dragon's nest, you best expect for a legendary and layer actions to activate.
Right. I know we should preface that there are D&D stories that are already there.
Oh, they're already pre-made. There are tons of them.
Right. Versus what we're playing is we're playing an original story through Brandon that he's created. Because there's characters that people know, there's story, like the same two people can play the same story but have completely different reactions and talk about that. versus like with this situation where there's no one else besides our group knows this story as far as how it's played. No one
Not
else is
yet.
playing this story.
And they not yet. Check out roll call on May 3rd.
May 3rd.
Roll call begins.
Roll call.
Anyway.
I mean, so like going forward, it's hard to know. I mean, especially because since we are relatively newer players compared to Brandon, it's harder for at least for me to be like, hey, what else do I want? Partially because of Homebrew and D&D Beyond has made everything simpler. And if there's anything I don't have, it's easy enough to make. Whether it's a new race, I mean, classes are the only things that we really don't outright make, but you can make a subclass.
You can make subclasses,
Yeah.
which they're making a new class, which I'm hoping they make Artificer a real thing.
Right.
If you are looking for, we brought up precons real quick. If you're looking for your own adventure, like to go and buy, I recommend Curse of Strahd. It's got mystery, it's got a little bit of mayhem, it's got darker world, but you're bringing light. It's got vampires. That's what everyone needs. So
Vampire teen romance novel.
it is. I can assure you, it is not one of those.
Unless everyone plays a really good bard.
Then
Your party, from knowing that adventure, your party will die. But there's tons of books that if you want, Curse Straws, though, is my recommendation. But something I want to talk about that you brought up is a new edition.
yeah.
It's not going to happen for a long time because they're still churning out
Right.
content.
I mean, yeah, and then we should preface, these editions don't happen short. It's not like, 1 second there's one edition.
Yeah, they don't come out with a new one every year. They take some time.
Yeah, it's not the next Call of Duty. It's,
No.
It's definitely one of those things where it lasts until they're like, you know what, we should probably change things. I mean, it's like you said, they keep churning out new content, so it's one of those things where they may just go like, you know what, it's all 5th edition now, but we're just going to keep updating things, and unless they really want like rule changes. But even then, I can't imagine they want too much because they seem to be at a good spot where they can get with D&D Beyond flowing so easily,
Oh,
getting new
yeah.
players
Yeah.
in. I mean, because it's the difference of like how AC used to be done versus AC now. Now you just roll and see if you hit versus like doing
Thaco is doing math.
doing doing like, oh, let me do X is equal to negative B plus or minus the square root. Oh no, did you hit me? I don't know. I haven't finished my equation yet.
To give it a preference, I do believe that 5th edition started in 2014.
Right.
So 5 years is a long time. Let's be honest about that. But it's not. There can still be 5 to 10 more years of.
When you consider that it's been 40 years since first edition,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
so much that can happen in there's so many more books, so much more they can add to this version of this game before they even consider bringing out a new one.
Right.
Because 5th edition so far has been the most popular and most easy to get into because it's a callback to how it used to be, but also relevant and fresh.
Right.
So if they're whenever in the next, I'm gonna assume 10 years
10,
from now,
15, yeah.
whenever 6th edition comes out, I'm hoping it's has a nice core rule, but also has just a bunch of creativity and versatility in what you can make and what you can do. I love classes. Races are cool. Yeah, they give you cool things. They add cool stuff. Sometimes they give you cool abilities like being able to breathe in the water. But
that's
classes,
Yeah.
classes is where it's at.
I would
Right.
I would love to see, and it's hard because
You think of what other classes can
yeah,
they
what
make?
other class, but then you have things like Matthew Mercer came up with Blood Hunter, and it's like that that's really cool, and now you have the Artificer class, which
They've brought
is
back, and it's
also really cool. So it's
And subclasses, even if they don't
Yeah.
make a full class, making cool and diverse subclasses.
right.
Right, because that can be a whole different game changer. Like, because you could be playing a barbarian your entire D&D career, but then add a new subclass of it can change. I mean,
I mean, yours is new.
right, the Storm
Yours came
Herald.
out last year or the year before.
Right. I mean, because even something as simple as you could be playing a barbarian, and then you're a berserker or whatever. But then your traditional thought of what a barbarian is. But then you add in the Path of the Zealot, which then becomes a holy barbarian. That changes your entire style of playing.
Holy grog.
Yeah. Holy smash.
It becomes a paladin that doesn't want to wear armor.
Right.
To hit stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, so it changes your because again, so much of this is character driven. So I guess that's something that I wanted to touch on was because we're calling this "Why is D&D?" Now we've talked about like D&D as a whole and how we got into it, but we don't understand why we play it. That is kind of the main focus of it. Because so as far as like I know for me, why is D&D is I mean coming from a theater background, I've been performing for years, doing other kinds of things, films. You and I have done voice acting stuff. For me, it's such a character-driven thing because, like, I can enjoy combat, but there are times where combat gets frustrating for me because it's all left up to chance because it's dice. But that
or if your wisdom modifier is not that high and someone
you're
has
asked to leave,
and you get asked to leave and you leave the arena for.
We'll be telling that story on Roll Call starting May 3rd. Join us.
But so I mean, so yeah, there's times where. Combat can get frustrating, despite the fact that I play a very combat-based character. I'm a barbarian. I'm supposed to just run up and hit things. That's all I do. But for me, it's definitely the storytelling. It's the character acting and stuff like that, which is always the draw. And of course, which is why, like we mentioned, the first experience we had, I wasn't so about combat. I was a weird dwarf that headbutted doors open.
That was your shtick.
That was my shtick.
Yeah.
But it was for me. It was always been the characters that you're playing. It's the world that it's the storytelling. That's why you play it. That's like because I'm one of those people, and I know I will always get flagged for it. When I get a new video game, I put it on easy so I can enjoy the story. And there's people out there that give me such a hard time.
Baby mode.
And I don't care.
Learn how to enjoy things without getting yourself hard, like angry enough to throw a controller.
Right, and that's the point. Is like because I play games that I enjoy because I like the story versus. I mean, there's certain aspects to games that I can enjoy, there's times where combat is really fun, or you roll really well, or you do well, but I play it for the story and for being a character in a world. Part of it's great because then you do something that your DM's not expecting, which then throws them for a loop, which you feel really good about until he makes you pay.
Yeah. Well, we skipped a whole part of his story. Ah, man, if only there was like a useful... anything we were gonna find, or maybe we were gonna level up between now and rushing over to the end of the this part of the story. Man,
right.
If only our DM cared about us.
So, for as far as me, why D&D? It is, as we've stated before, it's an escape from reality, and not without the use of drugs, maybe some alcohol, but not usually.
Oh,
drugs.
there goes reality.
I end up with mom's spaghetti, but that's fine. But like, how did I get this?
Eminem does not endorse this podcast.
It's not.
No,
but Eminem, if you're listening for some weird reason, I would love to have you as a player. You can be the best bard ever.
It's true.
Vicious mockery, everyone.
All right, now we have to make a bard with a charisma of like 18, and
he'd be 20. He's max.
Okay, he's a rap god. But so yeah, so for me, it's the characters and the escape from reality where I get to play another person, which is the biggest draw to me. Because yeah, there's other aspects that can be great, but it's definitely the story. Because especially if you don't know the story, and with this circumstance, with you coming up with a story, there's nowhere I'm going to like cheat and be able to read a book that knows where I'm going.
You can certainly try.
So Sam, I guess the question leads on to why D&D for you.
I mean, it's very similar to your answer. I think a big part of it is I'm very much like creatively, I'm very much a story-driven person. I think, especially in this situation, I really love the character that I'm playing for your campaign. But I think another part of it is that I'm one of those people, like, I'm a workaholic. I'm very much like work, and I put a lot of focus on that in my life. So it's really nice to like once a week just say, fuck that noise, and like just pretend to be like somebody else. So I think part of it's that escapism a little bit. I think it's also cool because I feel more socially involved. I'm more of an introvert. So, this is kind of a comfortable setting for me as an introvert to like be around people and kind of open up a little bit. So I think that's why I do it.
Well, and I also think something as far as us go versus you is this is all still very new to us. So there's always something that we're learning. And granted, you probably still have those moments as well.
Oh yeah, whenever they make anything new, I'm like, whoa, that's cool.
Right, but versus like even us encountering a creature that we haven't, let's say we haven't read about something that you've known about for years.
Displacer beasts.
Yes, like displacer beasts. When we fought them, they show up and we're like, what the hell is this, as a displacer beast? And you're like, well, it's this thing, and we're like, what? So there's still that element of surprised that we're still getting because
Yeah.
I mean because even playing with something like for over a year or 2 years or something, you're still we're still running the things that we're like, oh, I don't know what that is,
Well,
or
I think
oh,
that's just because there's so much material. It's like you can
I mean,
constantly
yeah,
spice up your D&D life.
I mean, like like
just throwing
60s to
something
now,
new in
there's
there.
plenty of stuff to try and figure out with
Right,
stuff constantly being
right.
new.
And then they do throwback dungeons. They did their yawning portal.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, plus you have all these people out there that are creative enough to try and make new races or new stories and stuff like that, where they grab your attention. Because I mean, because things are being published constantly for new stuff for you to that people are telling you about. Like we found that one that from the book, was it the Book of the House, that released a new race that wasn't. It was a homebrew kind of thing where it was a race of like a clown race kind of thing where they're not like straight up clowns, but they're more like almost like jester people. But it was one of those things where it's like that is interesting enough to get my attention. Or you find something on Tumblr where it's like, hey, look, here's this thing where it's a dungeon, but it's inside a giant creature's head that's died and buried. And, it's like, oh, there's the mind inside the creature's head is being overrun. You have to go save the people in this town. And that it's one of those things where it's not D&D canon. But it's that stuff that you can constantly find stuff that you don't know, or your DM finds stuff that you're like, oh, they're gonna hate me after this.
Yes.
So
many times have I thought that.
right. So as far as us, I think that's also a factor. And I mean, like you said, there's always still stuff that you're learning, even playing this long. No one's gonna. If anyone claims that they know everything about D&D,
They don't. They're lying.
Yes. So I guess the question is, because again, you've been playing since you were like 8? You said
Around then, yeah.
around then. So I guess the question becomes, why D&D for you? Good answer.
Well, I mean, at that point, I have to pull out the Rolodex and start going through the different cards in there.
When I was a young child.
Well, I guess the question is, after all these years, I know I'm making you sound like you're ancient. Why do you still D&D?
Why do I still D&D? For, I guess, the love of the adventure, the love of being able to. I mean, I love pre-constructed adventures. They're good. They're useful. They're very nice. If you want to, I mean, one day we may do one, or we may do a pre-constructed one shot. But I love making things, like just putting my hands in that pile of dirt and just making something out of it. And that's the player / creative side. The DM side is I love to challenge them. I love to challenge the people that play, in the sense of they're comfortable. They think they know what they're doing. They think they get what's happening, and then you just you take the softball. You take the baseball, not softball. Softball doesn't really. Take this baseball in your hand and you just spin it, and you do a curveball, and they're just like, wait. That's what's happening now,
right.
And watching everyone's face. Sometimes it happens all at once, and you'll see. Or sometimes it'll be when I'm describing things, a light bulb here, a light bulb there, a light bulb there, and then everyone immediately as a group goes, we did a bad.
And I got to imagine, because even as a DM, when we throw you the same curveball, there's some kind of almost like...
Oh, there's an excitement. For
it's like-
I have
it's
to,
like
on
a-
the fly, I gotta like bob and weave.
It's like the
Yeah.
5 levels
Yeah.
of grief. For your, like, there's the shock, you're like, you did what now? Followed by the, oh God, please don't tell me you did that, the bargaining. Followed by like, okay, they did it, what can I do now as far as figuring out? And then you're like, you know what? I'm glad you guys did that.
There are so many moments, and you'll see, if you continue with us on this journey, you'll see where there'll be moments where they fall right into my hands, and I have them like scared little birds.
We're not scared little birds.
No, we're scared little birds.
You're scared little birds.
He's a scared little bird.
Or there'll be times when
He has those same birds, and
And
they
then one of
bite
them-
his hands. He's like, ah, what the heck?
and they bite me or peck me in the forehead, and I'd be like, okay, that didn't work. And those moments are what I live for. Is you never know what's going to happen. You never know what your players are going to do. They never know what you're going to do. But there's a shared story being made.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
two sides of this story that come together and make what happens in the game. And what happens for if you have like let's say you're doing your own game, you have spectators just watching, or if you continue to watch us, you'll be able to be a part of this and be like, hold on, Soren did what? Or Cal didn't do that.
Right.
And or anyone else, or this NPC was secretly this all along, or they could say something and make fun of somebody and make an NPC very mad with them.
Right.
And that happens on the fly.
Right, because because that changes the whole story just depending on how things go. I mean, like for example, we have our holiday one that we've done, where depending on what we do determines which Santa we need to fight based on the path that we took. Yeah. But we can talk about more of that on another time, because I think that just about says why D&D as a whole. Because again, we're going to get much more into these topics at a later date. I mean,
we got tons coming.
There's tons of questions to be answered. There's tons of opinions on different things. But I think right now, we've set a good precedent. I think the biggest thing to take away is if you want to play D&D, why do you want to play D&D? Whether it's story driven, combat driven, or even just being social. That's something that we lightly touched on. Sam mentioned it. There are times where just being social with people in a an environment that's not high pressure. Because again, it's one of those things where combat, like one round of combat is supposed to be 6 seconds in game, but you can spend an hour discussing and teaching and things like that. Finding a good DM is always a good option that fits well for you. Because again, there's you can have DMs that are more serious or more lax, but you have to find the one that's right for you.
Everyone's different.
But I think the biggest thing to take away from this why D&D is now is the easiest time to get introduced into D&D.
Definitely.
With technology being where it is now, like with D&D Beyond, everything is on, like the books are all online. There is probably no easier way to start to learn about it, to get involved with it, or to even find groups. Because again, there's endless things like Facebook, Discords, heck, just Google groups. I mean, there's like an app for, like Air D&D, which is if you're out of town finding a D&D group that you want to play with. If you're looking to get into D&D now, it's the best time to try and figure it out. And don't be disheartened by one bad experience. Everyone has a bad game or a bad apple, because sometimes it's not even the DM. Sometimes it's another player, and usually a DM can recognize that pretty right out the gate, and they can take the actions accordingly. So if you find a good DM and you have bad players, that can be rectified as well. So we definitely encourage you guys to get into D&D, because of course we did. No pressure. But now is the best time to try and get into it. So even if you have an idea of wanting to even figure out what it is, ask around. There's bound to be people local to you.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Even if not, that's why there's things like Skype or Discord and stuff like that. You can find people.
Even D&D Beyond has an online forum for online D&D games.
It's like this. It's same thing with like any other video game. Online friends are just as real as in-person friends, and if anyone tells you different, they're liars, because they don't understand. So you even if you need to do it through like Skype or something else, you can find someone who will let you into their game, into their story, and help you along in your adventure into playing D&D.
So if you guys have any thoughts on this, you want to tell us how you guys got into D&D, or if you want to tell us, why you still play it, you can feel free to look us up on Facebook at D10tion, and just drop us a comment, send us a message. We'd be happy to reply back and discuss this further if you guys wanted.
Yeah, let us. If you have any questions about D&D, you can send it to D10tion and say, I have a question, and we will do our best to answer it. We are still learning. I mean, I'm learning new things every day. They're learning all the time. We'll learn together. That's what what we talked about, what we're trying to go for.
Yeah. All right, so you guys can find us on Facebook or Twitter at D10tion. That is D10tion. Or you can find us on YouTube under Roll Call D&D. All right, so I think that's it. D10tion dismissed.